So these things are becoming more and more talked about as time goes on when it comes to relationships, forgiveness, and it's about time we talk about it because it's really uncomfortable for people to even think about, let alone talk about. And if we don't talk about this, it's going to not be understood properly. You're not going to understand forgiveness if we don't talk about how uncomfortable it is really to work through forgiveness, to work through being forgiven. And this is something that I've had personal experience in. And as much as I am definitely not a perfectionist, but I'm also definitely not a perfect, all knowing, encompassing person. I'm not somebody who is altruistic either. I have biases, I have judgments, and I have preferences and ways of doing things in my life that has not just been a preference for shits and giggles, or I like pizza with no pineapple, or I prefer pizza with olives, right? For instance, pause if you're getting hungry and make sure that you eat, please. Make sure that you're hydrated. Have some coffee if you are working on curving that appetite a little bit, fast as needed. If you are drinking tea, please make sure you eat and just continue on. And if this topic is too heavy at this point, feel free to, you know, dig into something else, or maybe find something to do that moves you a little bit, that gives you some physical movement, because this is like a really big topic and we need to work through this if that is something that is the right time and place for you to work through this. Maybe you need to come back to it, maybe you don't need it at all. But if you're sticking around and you decide that this is something you want to even work through your nosiness of this, or your curiosity, maybe you're not really nosy, you're just curious about this. This is something that really needs to be discussed deeply, heavily at this point in 2025 and beyond, where we're evolving in our growth and in sort of like the way that we handle things, the way we understand therapy, the way that we understand forgiveness, the way that these things are changing. So let's get into this here. This is not the perfectly edited episode either. I'm not perfectionistic. I don't have a college degree in audio engineering or microphone enhancing or any of that. I just put a little bit of money into my software that I enjoy once in a while to sort of enjoy the art of creating, but for free. I've also used apps to record. I've used the apps built into my phone when I've had no money, and when I don't have the money now to enhance and change my sound, I will continue to use the apps built into my phone. So if this sound is not to your liking, feel free to find a more professional sounding person. Anyway, on with what we're discussing here, forgiveness. This is very heavy. And I'm kind of getting through the fluff and small talk because, again, this is very heavy. I've been watching a lot of TikTok, a lot of YouTube, just in my spare time, taking a little bit of downtime to go into self-help mode and reflect. And especially when it comes to like TikTok and, going into YouTube for educational purposes and things like that. And then TikTok for that emotional relief. Somebody was talking about the power of emotional connection through just collective memes. And then it made me think of like the hashtags through spiritual growth that we find ourselves joining and kind of going into on TikTok, right? So kind of where this is coming from, if you've seen a lot of TikTok, if you're on TikTok getting a lot of views right now, which some of you I'm happy to say are. Whether I fuck with you or not, that's cool that you decided to continue on your road with TikTok and get views. And I hope that in some way this education has impacted you on that in whatever way you found TikTok. What's really cool about this is this genuine understanding of like TikTok and the connection we have and how it's gone into other parts of life, like these social sort of connections we find ourselves scrolling through, like Instagram, are things that we are doing in the process of finding how our animal instincts work. That's how I see social media. So we're getting into like why that matters here. And for some of us, it matters. For others, it's for entertainment. And for others, it's not relevant. And I've gone through even different phases and experiences where sometimes social media I don't relate to anymore. And then, or even in certain aspects of life, I don't relate to anymore. And then other things I might. And other things I might come back to, like we all do. We have our moments where we're really searching for something educational, for instance, on YouTube, and then we leave that sort of interest for a bit, and then we come back to that interest, right? Well, the same thing is going to happen when it comes to relationships. So it will be that, like, let's say your relationships ended in conflict, and then, you know, what I've seen on TikTok is like relationships will fall apart, right? And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, like your family or your friends or your coworkers or your ex-business partners, suddenly, after a long time, they'll have something to say. Suddenly, they'll make an effort. Like it didn't happen for a while, but like suddenly they do this thing and they'll make a joke or they'll say something silly or they'll just kind of get bored enough to have something to watch or whatever. And maybe they'll find you on your social, maybe they'll find you on your Facebook, maybe they'll kind of show up somewhere or whatever. And the funny thing about all of this is the fact that, like, on TikTok, somebody was talking about a conversation where they were reading for like advice, like an advice question that they had received. And this person's family was like demanding that they text them back after years and got a hold of their number or whatever. And the whole point, like they had done a bunch of stuff that really deeply hurt them. Their parents treated the other sibling better, right? Just the sort of classic example of why no contact has been exposed recently and why no contact has been a private thing over the last 20 years, but why maybe we're starting to see people talk about it. It's not that it's a nasty way of getting back. It's really about teaching the process of something very heavy, which is that we've lost the ability to apologize. Like we've lost the ability to truly be sorry for something. We've lost the ability to truly be accountable towards an action that we took. It doesn't mean, by the way, that a person needs an apology. It doesn't mean that a person deserves an apology even, especially like if you've taken that on for yourself. Maybe you don't need to apologize to them. It's a private moment you have with yourself where you realize maybe in some parts you fucked up, in other parts they fucked up, and you don't owe them an explanation. They don't owe you an explanation, and people move on, right? Those kind of endings to these break-off relationships, these family members, these friends, these business partnerships, firing people, quitting jobs, like whatever the situation is. Sometimes there's situations where you try to be business partners with like your close friends or your family members or even close family friends that it's a little too personal to be business or it's a little too business to get personal. And so sometimes those relationships don't really match just because there's varying things that are a little bit too similar and everybody's like distracting each other from going in their own direction. So that's kind of like where this is sort of going in a direction of its own. And we've lost the ability to understand when we've done something wrong. That's what this whole thing is about. That's why people talk about failed relationships. That's why people talk about if somebody fucks you over. That's why you hear people go on about empowerment, go on about being motivated by your haters, go on about hating on those who have hated on you. Because we've really lost the ability to just realize when we've truly fucked up. Now, there are some caveats to this. If you've had a bad day and you've snapped at someone or got into an argument with them, and maybe you've worked a system out in your relationships where you can communicate that you're sorry. I'm not necessarily talking about those little mistakes, or if you have a bad day as a parent and you ultimately should apologize to your children if you fucked up. And if you don't do that, you're going to ruin your relationship and you're going to ruin the blessing of being a parent ultimately. And same with being a kid. If you've done something and you need to apologize to your parents, it works the same way in a sense, but you're learning. It's a little bit different because you're learning how to grow, and you really should, the more you grow, there should be some sort of, as long as that person has been supportive in your life, there should be some sort of accountability that you take if you fuck up and your parent has been supportive. You should be able to apologize to them, if they've earned that kind of trust with you. And if you are a parent and your child, you've done something to fuck up something or make a mistake, you should be able to apologize to your child with no ego. If it means that you're not spoiling them, if it means that you're not entitling them or teaching them that they can have everything they want, and you're really doing your best to teach them right from wrong, but then sometimes you happen to be wrong and you need to apologize to them for that. And so, but what does it really mean to apologize to someone? Well, I don't know. It's complicated because if you're apologizing, there is this hope that they will forgive you. And some people don't know how to apologize, so they'll crack a joke and try to break the ice that way. They'll contact you. They'll watch your videos. They'll do whatever. I myself have been in situations with family, friends, relatives, whatever, and I'm not really afraid to admit this because I'm very secure with myself. I'm not perfect, but I'm very secure with myself to admit that there have been times in my life, even in my growth process this year, last year, couple of years, the last few years, where I will see and I will get curious, family, friends, whatever, how my impact has left a person if I've left a situation. And it's very interesting to see that because I've left, they've changed directions all of a sudden. And I don't go looking for a space to talk to them. I don't go looking for, if I know that in certain ways I fucked up or in certain ways they fucked up, and we've ultimately extremely changed directions, especially when it comes to parents, especially when it comes to partnerships, especially when it comes to siblings. Sometimes you really don't need anything to say, and the sort of space is there, and you don't have to, I don't feel that somebody owes me anything, so I'm not gonna go and say anything to them. I'm not gonna go and look for a way of talking to them. I'm not gonna try to, because I don't feel like they owe me their time anymore. At a certain point, after you've been away for so long, people don't really owe you their time anymore. And the reason why I'm saying that is because you get a lot of like, and this is something that and I'm going to have to break this down, but this is an overview at this point. And I'm kind of trying to relate to both sides of this because on the one side, you have the person who is getting contacted, and on the other side, you have the person who's doing the contacting or the people who are doing the contacting. And you see a lot of like, what the fuck happened, or, you know, in somebody's mind, right? Well, what the fuck happened to you as a person? Like, it gets to a point where if somebody, I'm not talking about the mistake, like, it's not really just about a bad day at a certain point. It's not about a bad fight for a couple of weeks. At a certain point, the really brilliant thing that it comes down to is about a broadening of, and I think this would be a good demonstration. That's why I watch a lot of adult cartoons and children's cartoons, which are kind of two separate types of cartoons. But that's kind of why, like, it's so important to have like an expression of art, because you realize what you're enjoying and kind of what you're processing that is going on around you. And so what's going on with all of this is that you get to a certain point where you go in, and this time creates even more space, which is really kind of a weird feeling, but it can be a cool feeling if you have gotten kind of bored of community or situations or whatever. And then in other feelings, it can be kind of weird. So it's kind of like when you're on the playground and you apologize right away. For some reason, as kids, we've learned to apologize right away. And then in other phases of life, when we become adults, for some reason, that accountability goes away, where we don't feel like we owe anybody an apology for anything, and we don't feel like that anybody owes us anything. And so what I think we've turned into as a society are just people at the end of the day with preferences. And so what you ultimately have to do is start apologizing earlier on in your relationships and communicating better in your relationships. If you want the results that forgiveness will give you, if you want forgiveness, sort of, you can't expect forgiveness to be just handed to you on a silver platter after so much time of deep hurt, and you hurting your children, or you hurting your loved ones of any kind. You're hurting your pets, you're hurting your dogs, you're hurting your cats after a certain point of so long hurting your pets. What ends up happening is even your pets they don't forget, but we're not perfect. And if we're little kids and we're not taught how to take care of our pets, or, you know, we're not taught that pets have boundaries just like humans do, you know, then that's something we have to learn. And once we learn that, then it's like, okay, you understand that you didn't know any better. And once you learn better, you can do better with your new pets or with your new relationships. And sometimes you're letting go of roles and relationships that was attached to an identity, maybe being a parent, maybe being somebody's adult child or something, because really this is all down to adulthood at the end of the day. So when the earlier you practice apologizing in your relationships, the better you'll get at it, to be honest with you, because you'll realize that you're not always right. And then when you start to, I've got my yoga ball kind of here as I'm recording. So if you hear that, that's what that is. When you start to, I told you I'm not perfect at this. I'm not perfectionist. But yeah, when you start to like realize the implications of a support system in your life that's not perfect, or sort of like this implication that some hurt has been, it's more than just like a bad day, and people You yourself will eventually get tired of something, or somebody else will eventually get tired of something. What you'll realize, it's not so much always about reconciliation with a person. It's about understanding yourself, and then understanding where you were coming from, and that you didn't know any better at the time, and then kind of like growing into someone different that is unrecognizable to yourself, to the point where you won't need to hold on to an attachment of that old relationship anymore. And for parents, that's very difficult for like baby boomers and older parents, because there's this lack of parenting going on anymore when they realize, their adult children have been hurt so deeply. So then it comes down to like, okay, but you can no longer blame your children for the fact that you didn't live out your dreams in life anymore. You no longer have the right to blame the fact that you were a parent, and there is no excuse anymore. Once that attachment and the Band-Aid has been ripped off, guess what? You're done. Which means that you have the choice to go and be more successful than you've been, to grow as a person, and let it go. And if you know deep down that you've been a parent or a family member or friend or spouse or whatever the case may be, this could apply to any and all relationships. Maybe you've been the best pet owner that you knew how to be at the time, and you knew that your intentions were not to hurt anyone, even if there has to be this understanding that you did hurt someone, but that you did not mean to hurt them, and you have to forgive yourself. And once you forgive yourself, it's the apology to yourself, because sometimes there's this thing where we want the other person to apologize first, or we want the other person to come up, or maybe the other person has always been the one to apologize. And so what you then realize is, guess what? Maybe I need to apologize to myself for not understanding, not learning better, and not expect that the other person wants forgiveness, wants to, even if it means that they're doing the wrong thing by not forgiving you. You can come to expect that, okay, but like that's their responsibility. If they don't want to forgive me, that's what happened to having that's their loss approach. If at the end of the day they don't want to forgive me, at least I know I've done everything I could to try to earn it back or try to fix it. But if I've hurt them that deep, if I've cut something that deep, if they've cut me that off, then they've needed to change direction in their own life, and it wasn't matching my direction in my own life. And because of all of this, I can then forgive myself and grow as a person. And so in a lot of ways, at least growing up in certain experiences in life, being millennials, some of us have had these experiences where people have distanced themselves, especially older figures in our life, whether it was grandparents, parents, siblings. They've distanced ourselves and changed the trajectory of our relationships for us. So we've had to learn to watch them change their life direction, especially older siblings or older cousins or whatever. And you've had to watch them change their own life direction. You've had to watch them get mad at you for things. And then it's almost more painful sometimes when they really didn't forgive you, but because you're in the same family or you're in the same friend group, or it's more convenient to have you around, they will repress something just to keep you around and keep that relationship, and it will become more of an artificial relationship or a low contact vibe. And being an all or nothing kind of person with all or nothing thinking preferences, you might have some deep hurt over that, and then you have to decide, can you roll with that change in the relationship? Because we're at an age now where we get to decide what matters anymore, like especially when you become adults. If you are kind of going and growing into your 20s and early 30s, I think you still have a learning process, but once you become 18, you have that choice to decide to take your life, and you want to become somebody who can learn, even if it takes years to learn how to become an adult, even if it takes decades. Maybe you start a process that takes 10 years, 20 years, and you start that process and you learn how to manage certain things. And maybe it still takes you a long time by the time you're 40 and older. It's not like we have this thing where, okay, once you turn 18, you have a handbook. It's not like that in life. And sometimes it takes us a long fucking time to become an independent person or a person with interdependence who can maintain a level of independence that is not seen as, a bad thing. And because I think we've lost self-respect is what we've lost, to the point where people are groveling, begging, watching, to the point where we ourselves will sort of get a little curious. And then it just depends on like how far does that curiosity take you. And luckily, well, I say luckily, but really through a lot of deep introspection, I've worked on myself to a point where sometimes you're just never going to know. And sometimes you really don't have the time to put that into a place in life where you are owed something. And so that's what I've had to learn is sometimes we are not owed. I am not owed any answers or information if I've decided to leave, and I'm also not obligated to give any information on my own life or direction or how I got where I am now versus where I was a year ago versus where I was 2 years ago, 5 years ago, that kind of thing. And that's why privacy becomes more important the more adult you become, the more independent you become, because you have to learn eventually and ultimately to trust yourself. And so in doing that and in understanding that, you'll recognize that forgiveness of yourself is going to be the most important thing in this lifetime, because you'll never really know if a person actually forgave you or kept you for convenience unless you're in the right relationships with the right people and the right support system. And the only way to know that is to make your circle tiny and then have community around you with, maybe loving community, maybe fun community, maybe activities, maybe doing things that are cool for, this sort of like community building that will be really, really beneficial for you, for your community, for education, for work, for fulfillment, for entertainment, just for like fun. Maybe you have a balance of like where not everything has to be business related. Some things can be community related, and then other things can be work related and business related and creative related and things like that. And then maybe some of these things fit multiple of these, if you think of them as hashtags in your life without having social media, whether you have social media or not. And you recognize that some hashtags, some keywords are going to fall into multiple hashtags, and some parts, the content within your life is going to fall under multiple hashtags at times, whether you have social media or not. That's how I think of this. That's how my brain is sort of like connected in this wiring to think of this. So forgiving yourself is going to be the ultimate prize at this point. And the only way that you know you're in the right relationships, if that's something you need to know, look at the work that they're willing to include you in doing this deep work together. And look at the conversations that you guys have and look at how deep they are. And notice how you feel about that. Do you feel yourself pulling away from these deeper conversations? Do you feel yourself giving too much of those deeper conversations? Maybe the other person, you're putting too much of that out there and the other person doesn't want that, or maybe they don't want that kind of communication with you that they would value in somebody else because it's not matching in life. And there's preferences we need to respect and expect that there are boundaries that I've had to learn to respect in others only by doing my own deep work and my own boundaries, not by being told to respect boundaries, but by creating my own boundaries. Will I have learned to respect, say, your boundaries as my audience, for example? So or somebody else's boundaries that I've worked through with this, or my own self in self-respect. Again, it all comes down to self-respect. And I think as a society with new advancement and things like that, I think we've sort of, as much as I love all of this newness and advancement and education and technology and finding a life direction, finding a quote unquote life purpose in your life, as much as I love that for you, and especially for my family, for myself, oh my God, like I've never really put myself first in this way until now. Finally, I had to get to that point by realizing the most important thing that we've forgotten is self-respect. Taking pride in the work that we do, in our relationship practices, in our relationships, in our family, in the care that we give, in the care that we receive, and being okay with receiving that from others as well, and being okay with giving that to others and contributing, and being okay ultimately at the end of the day with just like taking pride in cleaning. Like, one of the first jobs I've ever had was cleaning the bathroom, taking pride in that, taking pride in reading a good book and finishing that book. I've not always been the most dedicated bookworm, but when I do read books, I take pride in the books that I read, even just the space that I have in myself to read a book, or the space that I have with my closest relationships to read books together, as a private moment or a private practice together as a family or relationships or whatever that we have. And so that is really valuable. And it's not something that is it's not up for debate. It's not up for bragging rights. And it's not a flex, really. I don't see book reading or education as a flex. But for some of you, that might be your growth flex. That might be I've found something to do in life. I've found a new life direction flex. That's cool. Like, I see that in my work and in my business. That might not mean anything to you. So it's like all about preferences, but it's taking the pride in the work that you do so deeply, whether that's cleaning toilets, reading a book, finishing an essay, or freelancing, side hustling, or taking a trip and having that trip go really well for you even, and having that trip be what you've needed for yourself. That's like really hard to do because you're always worried about everybody else, right? But for yourself even. And so that's what really it all comes down to at the end of the day. And so, go into your AI and that's all I can offer you is like go into your AI at this point. Go into Grok 4, go into, if you really like ChatGPT, if you really like Gemini, if you really like Claude, go into your AI of choice here, your operating system. Go into your pen and paper, go into your journal, go into your notes, and maybe go into your calendar and see what's coming up or what you've done, and really go in deep on yourself and your work and your life. Reflect forward, but also take pride in your work and figure out what it is that matters to you in your relationships, and stop expecting everybody to just hand you forgiveness or hand you an apology or hand you some kind of resolution. You have to find that resolution within yourselves, and you have to stop being bored. We have to keep ourselves busy, even if we're learning and educating ourselves all day for a while, even if we are entertaining ourselves, even if we are taking a day trip or a vacation of some kind, as long as it's not like overly frivolous, where you have these like frivolous luxury needs, that's kind of ridiculous, that's not even realistic, that you might get one time in your life, or you might get for a few years in your life, and then you're sad that those luxuries are gone. That's not really real. That's something you've got to work through. And I've had plenty of times where I've had lots of money and plenty of times where I haven't. And you've got to be able to adapt to that as much as we don't want to, as much as it's difficult to. That's part of being an adult in life. And it's not always the easiest thing. And We have to really do what we have to really do. But that's all that it really comes down to at the end of the day, is that when we apologize and we feel it in our kind of like being called to it, don't ignore it. Apologize earlier on. It doesn't mean you're submitting to anything. It doesn't mean that you are like giving up your pride. It actually means you're taking pride in your learning, in relationships, in your work. It actually means you're taking pride in how you treat people, how you treat others, how you show up for your kids or for your parents as an adult or as somebody who's growing. Even if you are a kid, maybe you're not an adult yet and you want to start this now, it would be a good time to learn. Any time is a good time to learn deeply. So hope that this episode takes you through something in your life, and hope that you find the peace within yourself that you need by doing the deep work, even if it takes years. And thanks so much for being here and showing up to do the work with me.